Hello, everyone. I just wanted to go over briefly the week 3 study questions about the Facebook experiment. Um, these are open-ended questions, so there really is no right or wrong answer to any of them. But there is a basic method that I'm asking you to apply here, and the outcome of the method of applying the method is really up to you. That's why there's the why or why not, because I think it is a matter of opinion. But the method is there. What I mean by the method is that if you're going to do a Kantian analysis of something, you need to apply the categorical imperatives. And the categorical imperatives actually are rules, and those are the rules. And how they are to be applied in a particular situation, that is where things get fuzzy, indeterminate. The same with the greatest happiness principle, in the sense that it is a general rule, and there is a problem. I mean, in applying general rules, in that it's not always clear how they are to be applied in particular situations. So, first question: did the Facebook experiment violate either of the categorical imperatives? Well, what's the first categorical imperative? It's the one about universalizability. Whenever we are in a situation where we're thinking about whether or not what we plan to do is ethical or not, what we do is, number one, first, try to articulate for ourselves what our rule of action is, or our maxim of action. That is the first step, and not an easy one. And that is one of the difficulties of using the first categorical imperative, is it's never completely clear what your maxim of action is, but you have to decide. And the second question you ask, and the most important one, I guess, is whether or not that maxim of action, that rule of action, is something that you will be a law for everyone. That's the universalizability part of it. The second categorical imperative has to do with persons. And the imperative is actually something like never use a person as a mere means to one of your ends, but always treat them as an end in themselves. Now, this can be this can be explicated in many ways. Don't treat persons like things. Don't exploit persons, but always treat them as ends in themselves. There's different ways of thinking about it. But in any case, okay, how would these apply to the particular situation? I suppose if you were an executive at Facebook, or whoever had the decision-making power in terms of approving this study, you know, what is the general rule? Well, it is, I don't know, it could be something like, well, the rule would be it is okay, or when there is some benefit to be had, either economic or in terms of social science, go ahead and manipulate people's emotional states. Something like that. I mean, this is why it's so hard to actually formulate the maxim. If that is a good candidate for the maxim, then we ask whether it can be universalized. That is, whether you could will that everyone in a similar situation acted the same way. That's where, things get really fuzzy. I don't know. Is there an obvious answer? Can you universalize that rule that if there is some benefit to be had, that it's okay to manipulate people's emotional states? I don't know. But if we move to the second categorical imperative, which tells us never to treat a person as a thing, never to exploit them, I think probably it is more clear. That is, it's more clear that the categorical imperative, the second one at least, it does not allow for the kind of thing that Facebook did. At least that's an example. I mean, as the beginning of a Kantian analysis of the thing. The second question, whether it conformed to the greatest happiness principle, well, things are good insofar as they preserve or add to the general happiness, that is, the happiness of everyone involved. things are bad to the extent that they diminish the happiness of everyone involved, everyone whose interests are at stake, or positively cause them unhappiness or suffering. If that's something like the greatest happiness principle, how is that to be applied in terms of the ethical situation or the ethical aspect of the Facebook experiment? It becomes a much more empirical question. That is, if one could argue that the overall benefit of the Facebook experiment in terms of, I suppose, allowing us to understand better the effects of social media, if that overall benefit in the future is good enough, then it would perhaps outweigh whatever suffering might be caused the people who are subject to the experiment. So it becomes an empirical question. It becomes the kind of thing that perhaps Hans Jonas is good at, in saying that we it's very difficult to determine the results of such a large scale experiment, especially. So on the other hand, calling the thing outright bad would have to depend upon the experiment in some way, either diminishing people's happiness or outright causing them unhappiness, and that's equally difficult to prove. That is, I don't think there's any evidence that anyone who is subject to the experiment actually suffered. Now, it may be that some people, when they found out that they could have been exposed to the experiment, that might have caused them distress. That needs to be taken into account. But there's many different things that need to be taken into account. So did it conform to the greatest happiness principle? That is a research question, I suppose, in the sense that we would really have to get down to the details of what the actual results, what the impacts were, both for science and for the individuals involved. So I don't think it's clear at all what the answer to number 2 is. Maybe looking over it, if there are 3 things at play here, the first categorical imperative, the second categorical imperative, and the greatest happiness principle, it seems to me that only one of those things points us definitively towards a certain ethical answer, and that's the second categorical imperative. It seems to me clear that despite the terms of service, that Facebook probably violated the second categorical imperative, but that's just an opinion.